Welcome back to the Beyond the Dojo podcast. I'm Lauren.
I'm Jeremiah.
And we were meandering over what we should, how we should lightly start off this very in-depth, very serious scientific discussion of a podcast.
That means she's going to do most of the talking.
Just a moment ago. Well, not really. It's actually just going to be a bunch of ranting, so if you want to go ahead and turn this off, it's fine. We won't be offended.
But we'll make the ranting entertaining.
We will make it entertaining ranting. You know, so speaking of ranting, I'll rant about this. In our 6 to 8-year-olds class, we've got 13 or 14 students?
Yeah.
6 of those students, ready? 3 of them are females named Peyton. So
yes.
Peyton A, Peyton N, and Peyton whatever the other one's middle name was.
Yeah.
And then we have a Braxton, a Braden, and a Brantley.
Yep.
And you always call Braden Brandon.
Yes.
That's half of the class right there. Confusing names.
Yeah, but not to my defense, but to my demise. I'm horrible with names either way.
Which is even better because he can't remember their names at all.
I call them the wrong names all the time.
Banana. and then
I always call them, if I can't think of their name, I call them Billy.
Well, and then you accidentally called one of the Peyton's younger sister is also in the class, and her name is Marley. When this is the first Marley we've ever had,
right.
And Jeremiah's like, Peyton. She's like, I'm not Peyton. My sister's Peyton. We're like, I know, Marley. I'm sorry.
That girl's adorable. She's
we have
absolutely
the
adorable.
cutest kids in that class. Usually I want to severely injure 6 to 8-year-olds, but these kids are actually pretty cute.
Yeah.
But I think it's because you have a class of mostly girls now.
No, it's, it's mostly girls, but
girls.
It's not because they're there.
Do what? Oh, that they're cute?
Yeah, there's just moments where everybody has their
Everyone has their cute moments.
Yeah.
Yes, we all have our cute moments. So today, we've actually been kind of discussing this back and forth for a couple of months. We want to talk about the Dunning-Kruger Effect when it comes to martial arts. So I'm going to use the Wikipedia definition of that so I don't completely butcher it. The Dunning-Kruger Effect is a hypothetical cognitive bias stating that people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. It also kind of states that people who have a higher ability at a task tend to underestimate their ability, and that's usually due to people around them. They usually are comparing themselves to other people. So what it normally looks like is it's kind of like this bell-shaped curve. It's like you start to learn a little bit about a subject, and your estimation of your ability skyrockets up like this. So you got kind of go up to the top of that bell-shaped curve, and you think I know everything, so I share everything that I know, and I correct everyone because I am correct at everything because I now know this stuff. But then the more that you learn about it, you actually drop off on your estimation of your ability, and you realize things. So we're gonna break
Lauren,
some of that down.
You're guilty of that? Is that what you're saying? Because you said I know you're using.
Oh, I know I've done it.
I know I've done it too.
Oh no, I remember the first couple of years of doing personal training. I was taking in so much information. This is back when Facebook actually allowed you to see the posts of pages that you liked, because now they really don't show it as much because they want those pages to have to pay. But I learned a ton of the information that I know from these Facebook pages, and I wasn't just learning from crazy BS people. These were people who are deep into the science, who are reading research, who are working with clientele, who are sharing experiences and whatever. So I was learning so much information from that I would take that and I would share it, and I would just be like, yeah, you should all know this, and I know this, and I'm smart, and you're dumb, and whatever. Wow. And it wasn't quite to that extreme, but I did have I actually developed a negative attitude toward other people in the field, and I didn't have that much experience. I didn't have that many interactions with people. I literally had zero reason to have negative feelings toward other personal trainers and other fitness people, but I was literally taking these people's angst and bringing it into myself, and I'm like, they have this knowledge and they're mad about it, so I now have this knowledge, so I must be mad about it.
Interesting.
so you're absorbing that information, but you know,
I mean, Facebook for me was just cool car pics.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, look at that car, like it. Oh, look at that bonsai, like it.
Right. Well, I tend to use news when social media platforms are new. People who are in the knowledge field are really good about getting on there and getting information out. So I've used I used Facebook for a number of years for that, and then I used Instagram for that. But both of them are kind of being screwed up now, so you don't see as much of the knowledge based stuff. But you can use YouTube for that.
Yeah, well, most of those pages have their own websites now, anyways, right? To where you have to pay to get on.
Sometimes they want you to buy their course and stuff like that. But sometimes people are just just sharing information. People as a coach or whatever, they're sharing their smarts so that you can see how smart they is.
You read that section to me this morning about the study in the United States and in the U.S. You want to share that also?
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to get a little bit more into the details of each part of that curve later, but I do want to go down. I've read through this whole, I read through this entire Wikipedia thing, and a lot of this is about self-perception, but this very last piece, we're just going to use this as a caveat. Studies of the Dunning-Kruger Effect usually have been of North Americans, but studies of Japanese people suggest that cultural forces have a role in the occurrence of the effect. The 2001 study, this is a very long study, here's the name of it, the Divergent Consequences of Success and Failure in Japan and North America, an investigation of self-improving motivations and valuable selves, indicated that Japanese people tend to underestimate their abilities to see underachievement as to see underachievement as an opportunity to improve their abilities at a given task, thereby increasing their value to the social group. So this may not actually apply to people in other cultures, but this is a North American phenomenon, most definitely.
Yeah. So what's funny about that whole thing is I remember, if you talk to a lot of the older generations, it was really discouraged to ask in-depth questions to senseis, and especially their Japanese senseis or anything like that, and they would get made examples out of. I was reading an article on SKM with Albert Chia, and he says back in the day we didn't ask a lot of questions because now we became the target to make sure nobody else asked any questions. So the sensei would overdo it and kind of and hammer the nail down.
Okay.
Yeah, and it makes sense now because the Japanese want you to act like you don't know as much as you do.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? That's the cultural thing. So anytime they feel like you're too big for your britches, in a sense, they want to knock you back down.
Right.
And it kind of explains all that. I always took it as like ego, the sensei's ego. In reality, a lot of it could be that, and I think some of it's cultural.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like where it's like, oh, you want to make yourself better than the rest of us. You're not. Dunk.
Right. Right.
It kind of made clarity to me. It gave me some clarity, but obviously there's individual situations. So
right. So especially in North Americans, and I think even more so, like we were kind of arguing about this before, is like I would argue that more Japanese are probably more similar to the world as a whole now when it comes to things like the Dunning-Kruger effect and putting information out there. I don't know that for sure, but social media has really propagated this. They have really accelerated this whole idea. And these studies were done in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Right.
I can only imagine how bad it is now if they were to research this.
My argument was it has to depend on the culture.
Right.
If the cultural norms of the country,
it's still going to water it down.
It's going to water it down a little. You're still going to have people that are going to voice their opinions and speak out, right? But I think in some of the more reserved cultures, it's not going to be as extreme. Right.
So let's actually talk about what it is. So essentially, the beginning of the Dunning-Kruger effect, as you're going up that bell curve, it's called illusory superiority. So you basically think that you are superior to other people, and you think that you know stuff.
The vertical part of the graph represents knowledge.
So it's as you increase in knowledge. So the way that it would look is if you had it'd be like this.
L.
So if you have a graph like this, the more knowledge you're learning is going this direction.
Yeah.
And your perception of your ability is here. Right. So the more you know, you learn a little bit, and all of a sudden it shoots way up, and you have this big perception of how much you know. But then the more you know, it drops back down. So what usually happens is you're learning a little bit, and you think you know a whole bunch of stuff. And I heard someone call this it was just the best description ever. It's called standing at the top of Mount Stupid. Because you know just enough to do some damage, but not enough to make a good impact. And you think you know more than you know. So essentially, here, at the top of Mount Stupid, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So, I mean, it's kind of from here and before, you don't know what you don't know.
So what is Mount Stupid in karate?
Mount Stupid in karate is...
Shodan?
I don't even know if it's necessarily that much, because I think that there are people even at different ranks who
Right.
are this is about self-awareness. Essentially, this entire idea is about self-awareness. And even if you are very self-aware, you probably are going to have some semblance of this Dunning-Kruger effect. It's just like some part of it, I think, is motivation and excitement about learning new things. But the other part of it is like, you don't know what you don't know. And it's not because you're a bad person. It's just sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. So whether you're a Shodan who's really excited to go, or you're someone who just recently started a Facebook page or an Instagram page or TikTok or whatever, sometimes people get really excited about doing something different and new, or they find this new little facet of their karate that they want to harp on or that they want to completely focus on, and they think it's a thing. And they're we've talked about branding before. They're building this brand around this one small thing, and then they start to push it out into the world.
Oh, wow. So I took that completely different. The idea was like, I look at our own dojo, and there's certain levels that you tend to have this, like, I know everything kind of attitude,
I'm not saying that's not true. It definitely can be.
I'm just telling you, like, I'm not asking your approval. I'm saying,
okay.
I'm just saying that's how I took it. So, like, for me, looking at it, I go, okay, Shodans, they achieve that level, so all of a sudden they're like, yes, I know this, I know this, I know that, and they want to share, right? And then it could be things like what I get nervous about is like when you have older siblings or parent-child situations where the parent may be a little bit higher in rank, or the older siblings higher in rank, and they start teaching their younger siblings or their children, and it becomes this issue now because the depth of their knowledge
is not deep
enough. It's not deep enough to understand what the principle is, or to understand the intent.
Or to even like have the wisdom to know which part of which thing you should be focused on with that person.
Right. So although the adult or the older sibling might have a good grasp at where they're at that time, what they share with their younger, versions is definitely more watered down. Like you could tell there's even more loss of depth from that individual to the next. Right. And that's what I thought was more like, to me, the effect in a dojo.
It can be. I definitely see it there too. Like, and we can see that before Shodan. I know you're talking about Q ranks. Yeah. We can see this with Q ranks where you have a class of a certain number of ranks. Like we have a 9-12-year-olds class. That's only, 10th Q up to 8th Q. Yeah. But then, and so it doesn't happen as much there. But then in the intermediate class, all of a sudden you have 7th Q up to like 4th Q, to 4th Q. Yep. So once depending on the personality of the student, once they're getting up toward 4th Q, now they do have a little bit of a superiority complex over these younger people. But technically they do know more. Right. But it's still a little bit more toward the beginning of knowledge. That's
or even the examples of students learning katas that are way above their rank.
Yes, so that is a good example of that. Someone, and then they want to teach it to somebody because they just barely learned it.
They just barely learned it. They got through the kata.
Right.
But you could tell there's a lot of subtle things that they're missing, and a lot of these small details. Right. And that to me is like, that's where you see your depth of karate, is in the details of your kata, and the details of your technique.
Right.
How well do you like micromanage? Not micromanage, but define what you're doing.
Well, one thing that Steve Ubel says is you should not teach what you're working on. And the reason he says that, to a point, is number one, you don't understand it well enough to be able to teach it. You don't understand it well enough probably to be able to perform it consistently. Right. But like you said, you don't have enough of a depth of knowledge to know even which parts you should teach. If you're learning something and then you immediately flip it back out and try to teach it, it's not to say that there's not an advantage of trying to reiterate what you've learned. Right. That's actually a really good learning tool, is to teach, or to at least, share what you're learning. But the problem comes when, you have a ceiling of how much you know. Yeah. You can't take someone further than you've never been. So if you only know the moves of Heian Shodan, but you don't understand, like, basic stance structure well enough, or like the hip positioning or whatever, or like understanding that your body should remain at basically the same height throughout the majority of the kata. If you don't know those little details, like you were saying, then you can't teach that stuff. So you're creating like a little clone of you who has all of your same flaws and all of your same issues, but you never went past, Mount Stupid in order to learn enough to be able to go back and teach them more stuff, or to learn it for yourself. and implement it in your own training, and then bring somebody else up behind you and get them over that mountain.
It's kind of funny because that takes a lot of self-awareness to know where you're at in karate.
Yes.
But then, you know, you get to that point where you're like, oh, this is all I have to know. You know, it's like in karate, I feel like, man, if you don't learn that lesson, that there's always something else to learn early on, you're going to just sit there and spin your wheels majority of your life, you know, a karate life.
Right. So this is kind of where I feel like this Dunning-Kruger idea is not as much dependent on rank, because there are students that are very self-aware, and whenever they first start, they may go through a little blip of that, but sometimes they will be able to see fairly quickly, like, hey, I don't really know that much, and I'm okay with not knowing that much. We actually had a really great example of this last week. We actually had someone come in and start training. He's actually the youth pastor at our church, came in and started training with us, and we weren't 100% sure on how he was going to perceive like what we were doing, because it's so much different. You know, we're doing a lot of basic stuff and whatever, and we weren't sure how he was taking that. But then, based on some follow-up things that happened, we were able to see, like, hey, he can recognize we're just working on basics right now. Right. So he was able to accept, hey, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know what I don't know. We actually had that
conversation. He was like, you know, I grew up wanting to do karate, and under certain circumstances, he just wasn't able to. But he always read a lot of kung fu books and karate instructional books, and he had this idea of what it was. Right. And then he's like, man, what I thought it was and what it is totally different. And it was cool to see that, because, you know, with nowadays with kids watching YouTube and all the information that you have out and abroad, it's very easy for someone to get that Dunning-Kruger effect where they feel like, oh, I could do Heian Shodan through Heian Godan.
Yeah. I saw it on YouTube. I know how to do it.
I know how to do it. You know, we've had guys like that were like, you know, they were intermediate level doing Kanku Dai because they saw it on YouTube, completely screwing it up. But didn't know that they were screwing it up. Right, and that's the important thing, is they don't realize they're screwing it up. Because I agree. We've even seen this with karate instructors where like I talked about, like someone harping on one specific idea and going for it. Sometimes when they learn new things, or like when a person will learn a new thing, they'll want to teach that. And because it's different or it's whatever, but they don't know enough about that specific thing to be able to teach it. You know, they saw it on YouTube, they took one class on it. You know, they don't have a lot of depth. They're already an instructor. They're already in teaching mode. Yeah. So they learned a new thing, so they want to go ahead and share it, but they haven't taken the time to cultivate what that is that they're learning. Right. And that's difficult. Even, you know, we're not perfect at that. We do the same thing, but it's just a common occurrence where we're just not, you know, we're having to balance that self-awareness of, like, I've been training in karate for almost 20 years. I can share that stuff. But I learned this new thing, be it a different martial art or a different concept or a fitness concept or whatever. We want to hurry and share that, but we don't have enough knowledge of it to be able to really do that effectively. So personally, when we hear that, we see instructors that do that, I wish they would, like, regress it, like that concept, right? They got it. They got these ideas, but I think they fail to realize that they had a foundation to where they could see and understand those ideas. Right. If they would just regress their teachings, like, slightly. You mean of the new concept that maybe they don't understand? Yeah, so let's say they're working on a certain feeling of a technique or a certain movement, right? And they got that, right? Right. But that certain movement or feeling they're experiencing comes from a foundation that is higher level than most people that are training underneath them. I wish they could see that, regress it back to that foundation level to where the students are. So that the students can reach at least that foundation. Yeah. And then kind of like start expressing other things, because by the time they get their students or people that go to their seminars or whatever to that level, they should have progressed even more. Right. See what I'm saying? Like, it's this whole sliding rule thing that I think a lot of these senseis, they go, I have to always be at the very extent of the rule, instead of, like, just metering above their students enough to where they're learning. Yeah. You're not holding them back, right? But you're teaching them solid depth of knowledge. The other thing is having an open line of communication about so, like, being able to say, hey, you know, to people of equal or slightly lesser rank. Right. This is something that I'm working on. I don't have it down completely. Let's practice it together, and maybe it'll change my understanding of it. But just know
I don't actually know this that well. But that's a self-awareness thing. You
Right.
know that you don't know. So you're able to share that, with these people and work on it together. Versus you're, a Nidan or a Sandan working on a concept and you're teaching a class full of green belts. They're not going to, even if the concept you're working on is technically a fundamental concept because maybe it was something that you weren't taught coming up.
Right.
It's still, like you said, has to be applied down to where they are at right now.
Right.
And you don't always have to be right. You don't have to make yourself look like you're a know-it-all.
I want to say this. I think the greatest blessing we ever had in karate was that both of us came from a background where we weren't the best in the world, but we were definitely the best in our pond.
Sure.
And we had that, we were like, like almost like we didn't know everything in a sense. And then to experience.
We didn't know everything, or we didn't know?
We didn't know everything.
Didn't know we didn't know. Okay.
You know what I mean.
I don't. That's what I'm asking.
We were not aware
gotcha.
of what we didn't know.
Yes. Okay.
That was a beautiful thing to go to seminars and to be exposed to all these other ideas, right?
Right.
And then to realize that, we need to work on things. In both our own individual cases, we were humbled enough to realize that we have to change our teaching.
Yeah.
Going through that process, I think, has been a blessing. Because now that when we see people or see things and we're like, yeah, that's out of my reach, we're also being able to tell that it's out of their reach too.
Dude, that was a really difficult process too, because the problem is that when you've gotten to a really high rank or a really higher level of ability, and you see something new and maybe it's completely contradictory to the way that you've trained. So that was our thing, is like we were exposed to people like Steve Ubel and we're like, yeah, literally everything we've trained up to this point just about is wrong. So
we're still experiencing that last night.
Well, we're still experiencing that. So going back and having to fix all of that for yourself, but then simultaneously you're also teaching,
right?
And you're trying, and you want to pass on that information to your students, and you should. But how much can you pass on?
Right.
And you can't rush your own training process, but you do have to train it on your own in order to be able to pass it on effectively.
Right.
So, that's still, once again, that's still in the self-awareness category. Usually the Mount Stupid is more in the unaware, but this is kind of heading toward the other end of the curve.
So what I was trying to make the point was that awareness reinforces what Steve says. You shouldn't teach something you're still working on, because we both fell in that trap where we were working on things and teaching it at the same time.
And it was really hard not to,
right?
Because they needed to know it.
They needed to. We, in our hearts, we were like, we can't let these kids or our students go back and forth like we did, right?
Yeah.
Because that would wreck somebody.
Yeah.
So we literally had to make sure we did it correctly.
Got it down, yeah.
Not only spoke the words, but did it physically on a very consistent basis before we taught it.
And I know that that's not what happened a lot of the time with me. I mean, the problem is that I would see it. I mean, as soon as it was pointed out to me, I'm like, oh, crap. And now I see it over here and I want to immediately correct it. And I would, oftentimes.
Right.
But then I eventually learned, like, I have to, once again, open line of communication, express, hey, this is actually a very basic concept, but I'm working on it because I am doing it wrong. So I'm sharing it with you because it's at your level that you should know it, but I'm working on it. So I just want you to know that's what's happening. But it took a while to get to that point where I was like able to express that.
That's that whole lose yourself, lose your ego, focus on what the art is and what the art's showing you, and where you want to take your art, what's your focus in it, And to me, that's what I guess I'm trying to get to is in sharing these experiences that we all go through it. It's not like you're some kind of outcast because you're that way. We all go through it, but it's a step in maturity. Not like maturity as a person, but in your karate. You have to have this maturity in your karate to understand that although you're working on these great concepts, it's not something you know.
Right. You don't know it well enough.
You know what I mean? So that's kind of trying to share it because I don't want people to feel like we're pointing fingers at people like, oh, you're too big for your britches and stuff like that. No, we're absolutely guilty of it. I'd confidently say that there was a generation in our dojo that had to deal with that.
With us? I know.
And I felt
going through that whole transition. I know. I
felt so much angst doing that because I knew how frustrating it is just to learn the moves and then have to relearn them and change them and this and that. I mean,
at least for them though, It was us being genuine and trying
Right.
to fix stuff. The way that I came up is all of the teachers that, I mean, and I appreciated having lots of teachers, but they were all teaching something different.
Right.
That was the problem for me, but
Yeah.
that's a totally different conversation.
Heartbreaking point. I had this one kid in my dojo, and he was the third black belt I ever graded up to Shodan. And he had this beautiful side thrust kick. I mean, this beautiful side thrust kick. But it was the old school, like, lift the knee up, extend the foot, hold it a little bit, come back.
Okay.
That whole, not locking out, but kind of pause at the end and back.
Okay.
He could do it, dude. He could roll his hip over, drop the foot. I mean, it was beautiful. And I joined an organization where they were saying that you should not hold the foot out there. You should change the position of where you're starting your knee. And I felt like I had to change it to accommodate the organization.
Yeesh.
Right?
Yeah.
And then he looked at me like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
He's like, I've worked so hard to get this technique. And I can't. And I'm looking at him like, I know, I can't deny that. I know. And it ripped me apart because I was like,
Yeah.
because you know that achievement.
Right.
You've got that first time where it just clicks in and you know you got a good one.
Yeah.
And then you have to change it and it's just like, oh, dude.
Yeah. I almost experienced that after Sandan and was told I had to change, and I flipped the bird and walked away. But I was older and a Sandan, so I was allowed to do that. But that's, that's once again another story.
So just to put it out there, Tucker, if you're listening, bro, I am
so sorry, Tucker.
dude. I am so sorry, man. You had an amazing slide thrust kick. You really
We
did.
ruined it.
And dude, I know, man. And when you went through that, dude, trust me, I did not like it. I did not like it and had to change it.
Yeah.
But
Well,
at that time, I felt like it was the right thing.
right.
I'm sorry, Tucker.
Yes.
Please forgive me.
So we've kind of been talking about it, but the downslope of the Dunning-Kruger curve is becoming aware of what you don't know.
Right.
So it's now you're having this awareness, like, hey, I actually don't know these things. And it's actually kind of twofold. So it's like, I am aware of what I don't know, even though I am increasing in knowledge. I'm continuing to increase in knowledge. I'm also increasingly aware of how much I don't know or how much I can't do. But at the same time, there's also this, there's almost like this community effect. Like, you're now becoming more aware of what people around you know and don't know. So that's part of it as well, where you start to sometimes develop like an imposter syndrome. So there's two different things that can happen here. One is you develop imposter syndrome where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not as well qualified as this other person who's further down this path than me, so I don't know enough, I shouldn't be sharing or whatever, I don't have a lot to value. Sorry, I'm like snorting, guys, I have like allergies going on. I'm not aware enough of things that I should be sharing, and once again, that's earlier on because it's still a slightly lack of self-awareness, because you're at that point, like, you don't know stuff, but you're not aware enough of all of the people behind you who also don't know what you know. And it's
Right.
okay to turn around and share what you know to those people who are up here on Mount Stupid.
Right.
The other thing, though, is even further along than that, or maybe around the same level as that, but just on the flip side of a different cognitive bias, is it's this whole, once again, superiority thing, is that, oh, if this is easy for me, it should be easy for you. I know what I know, and I'm aware of what I don't know, but because I know it, you should be able to know it as well. So this is kind of another aspect of that, where it's like, you do know stuff, but you're not really a good teacher because you don't realize that other people don't know what you know. So it's maybe a little bit earlier in that curve.
Right.
So that's kind of two different phenomena that can happen there.
Yeah. When you said that, I was thinking of one instructor in particular that we watch videos of, where he's always showing off his kicks and these things that he learned from Asai Sensei, and this and that, and he's like known to break people's arms, and like he always takes it overboard. I don't know who you think I'm talking about.
Continue, please.
All right, and he's always overdoing it overboard, and then he expects these people to do the same things he does, right?
Yep.
And he's doing the the Seiza jump up in the front stance thing, right? And he's got 60-year-old guys and
trying
these
to get them to do it too.
overweight people that they can't do that, or even guys like me that are built that way. That takes a lot more effort, right?
Right.
And he's just harping them on this, and they show, and it's almost like this show off thing,
Right.
Right? He's naturally talented. Can't deny that he is naturally talented. But he reinforces that whole idea that just because you're good at it doesn't make you a good teacher. And I think this is part of the explanation, is like, you don't realize like some of the stuff you do naturally is something somebody else has to learn.
Right. And see, that's almost like a different type of knowledge. Like, you have your own kinesthetic awareness,
right,
but you don't know enough about all of the surrounding concepts surrounding what it is you're doing.
Right.
So with karate, it's going to be like different physiology and kinesiology concepts. You don't have enough awareness of those surrounding concepts to be able to take what you're doing and apply it to somebody else. So it's like, you're not taking the principle and applying it. You're taking, early on in this curve, you're taking the little ideas,
right,
and you're sharing those little ideas because you think you know everything, because you know those little things, but you don't understand the principle. And I know Steve Weeble talks about this all the time. We, in a lot of ways, don't understand the principles because we're still working along this path. But if you don't know enough about the specific concept you're working on, and then all the things that affect those that specific concept, or how many different ways you can apply that concept, then you don't fully understand it. Now, that's not to say you can't teach it if you don't fully understand it, but
right,
to a point, you should try to have a pretty good grasp on something before you start teaching it. If you think that because you can do it, other people should just be able to do it as well, you don't know enough about
right,
what it is surrounding that principle.
Right.
Or you're just a jerk.
I'm going to just use Christianity as an example. Most
Sure.
people quote the verse, "Money's the root of all evil."
Sure.
Right? But that's out of context.
Right.
It's the love of money.
Right.
That's the root of all evil.
Right.
And that's kind of what you're talking about. It's like,
You have to have a context.
You have to have a context around what's going on and what you're focusing on. And,
Right.
And, in every aspect of our lives, we could take these examples.
Right.
Right. So it's not just the karate thing or an athletic thing. It's everywhere. Right. And it's crazy because it's one of those big picture issues.
Right. And then there's that flip side of that where it could be that maybe a person actually does know that other people can't do what they do. And I don't think everyone's like that, but I think some people genuinely don't realize it. I think when you're young and dumb and first starting off teaching, you really don't know.
Right.
But then as you experience more, you do learn, like, hey, I'm actually really athletic, or I have a great talent at this thing that I'm doing. Obviously, other people can't do it. At that point, it just becomes arrogance.
Right.
You're just building your own ego because you're like, well, I know that they can't do it, but I'm going to make them feel bad about the fact that they don't know how to do it, or they can't physically do it.
It's either ignorance or insecurity.
Sure.
And you're just trying to patch your own self.
Yourself up. Yeah, well, that's essentially, you're just trying to keep people down because, you don't want to break down the concept enough. Like you talked about earlier, you don't want to break down the concepts enough to be able to bring them up to your level in like a very sequential order.
Right.
You would rather like allow this huge gap to be there between what they know and what you know.
Right.
You want to point out the gap to them, but you don't want to bridge the gap.
Exactly.
That's completely, there's insecurity or an ego thing, or that's all in the same boat. But there's a big problem there. Yeah. So if you were able to get past those areas, because I think we all go through, and to some degree, we go through all of those areas. We go through Mount Stupid. We go through wondering why other people can't do what we do. We go through the imposter syndrome as well. People who are humble enough, who get past that point where we think we can't share what we know because other people are smarter than us. But I think somewhere after that, there's a balance that's really hard to get to. Yeah. Where, you know that there's more for you to learn, but you also have an understanding of like, I know actually a whole crap ton of stuff, like a metric crap ton of stuff about this thing that I've been spending all this time on. It's okay for me to share what I know and what I understand, but it's also important for me to admit where I don't know, I don't know stuff. Yeah. So that is, I think, the difficult point to get to.
Yeah, but it's the humility you talk about, though.
Right.
And now if you think back to all these like old like spirit training and stuff like that, where they try to humble you and everything else, it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense where you need to be humble enough to know what you know and know what you don't know, and to kind of be okay with that. Right. Accepting of who you are is like probably one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah. Well, that we've talked here about this, and then I know other people have talked about like.
Let me clarify that. Accepting of who you are, not who you think you are. Right. Is a hard thing to do.
We talked about this kind of parallel growth of spirituality as you grow in karate. Not to say from a religious perspective, or not even saying from like a meditative whatever perspective, but more of these like personality characteristics essentially that you're developing. The thing is naturally, psychologically, as you start to grow in your karate and you go through this entire process or similar processes like this, you're going to naturally build more humility if you allow yourself to go through the process and you accept it.
Right.
If you stunt your growth somewhere, that's where you're not completing that whole process of getting to the point of humility. You're not allowing psychologically yourself to develop and mature to this point. Maybe your karate comes over here, but your personality is still stuck over here on Mount Stupid.
Right.
Yeah.
Body and mind, conditioning. Yeah. That's just, it's, the more we talk about the things, the more the old sayings make more sense. Mm-hmm. They're not so hokey pokey like we thought. Like, body, you do exercise, karate, mind, you meditate.
It's not sitting and meditating for 30 hours.
Right. It's this whole building of character. And I think that's, where Funkoshi actually hit it on the head a lot more than most others. Mm-hmm. He talked about not only building body and mind, but he explained what that was. Yeah. Dojo-kun. I mean, you look at that. Mm-hmm. That's a great precepts for your dojo. Yeah. So. Yeah. All right. Interesting.
So, speaking of not knowing what you don't know, what you working on?
I'm working on Chinte, and within the Chinte, let me go ahead and break it down to really simple things, because funny enough, we were coached last night, and neither one of us had like a 20% passing rate.
It was pretty bad.
It was pretty bad.
It was really funny, but it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I've been working on this for over a month, and it was pretty bad.
Yeah, that's...
It was like, I fixed a couple things, and then, oh, by the way, all of this is wrong. Okay.
No, it wasn't like... It was, it was the reoccurring timing thing, Timing has to be immaculate. Mm-hmm. And proper muscle drive, muscle creation, or power creation has to be accurate. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're kind of falling off, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is the whole idea that we're, this is the easiest thing to say, but the hardest thing to do. When you extend or straighten your knee and you're doing a punch, your elbows should be straightened at the same time.
And if it's a reverse punch, you have to time your hip, too.
And you're timing your hip and everything. So it's this whole coordination thing, right?
It's way harder than you think it is.
Right. Especially if you could watch it on video and then turn around and put it in slow motion. Because slow motion is your best friend to improve on the smallest details. Because it expands it. You see it almost immediately. So, I was working on Chinte. Mm-hmm. I did a couple of moves wrong, like actual path of the technique wrong. Mm-hmm. There wasn't much of that. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of like poor timing of technique within the technique itself. Uh-huh. I mean, the tate shuto.
Yeah.
He's like, he looks like you're just pushing.
The same
but it's this different timing, right? The position of the fudodachi.
Oh, yeah.
It's these whole subtlety things that, we sit here and we're acting like we're getting beat down like a bunch of
I think it's funny,
redheaded stepchildren, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, the beautiful thing about karate is that you have control of that correction. Yeah. And that's what we get. We're like, oh man, we really suck. But at the same time, we're smiling about what we're saying because now for this next week or months or years to correct these issues is something to drive forward to. Right. Right. A lot of guys will look at these different external expressions of karate where they think this new thing will help them do their karate or this, that, or they manipulate the basic timing. Sure. Right. The problem with a lot of that is that their basic timing's off. Mm-hmm. So no matter how they manipulate it, it's not going to improve the technique. Right.
Doesn't matter if you go faster or not, your timing's still bad.
Right. It doesn't matter if you change up how you time a punch, right? Mm-hmm. If your punch sucks. Right. If your initial coordination still sucks. Right. And that's the hard part to understand, and it's taken me a long while to accept that. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm a big dude. I hit the maki. It feels strong. I feel like I connect. Oh, I'm good. Then I could turn around and video myself of that and immediately see that it's a muscled thing and not a technical thing. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And I guess we're just nerds.
Sure.
In a sense, because we're like, I want the technique right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was the distinct advantage that the Japanese had in the late 60s, early 70s. Was their technique was so much better than everybody else's, they were able to dominate. Right? But once the technical level started to increase everywhere else, the natural genetic advantage that larger Westerners had suddenly took off.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And it's like, we forget that you have to meet a certain technical standard before you can do anything else.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beautiful thing about our training now, at least for me.
Yeah.
Is like we do these, work through these katas, right? And we learn these fundamental like concepts and ideas of the kata itself, like the movement of the techniques, right? But then it just breaks down to the basic timing of the technique and positioning, you know, very, very basic stuff, but it makes the world of difference.
Yeah.
So.
No, we know what we don't know.
We know we don't know.
To a point. To a point. We know that there's plenty of stuff we don't know, but there's plenty of stuff that we know that we can't do.
Right. So would you? I don't know if I didn't mean to speak for you. Is there anything different than what I said?
So it's incredible that.
Don't cry. It's okay.
I think that for a while, backstands was the bane of my existence. Now it's futodachi.
Yeah.
Because I still don't have it right.
Yeah.
But the good thing is being able to see the technical errors like that. I'm very sensitive, so if my positioning is wrong, I feel it almost immediately. Or I feel it after a number of repetitions of it, and I begin to realize like something's not right. Yeah. Well, yesterday my left knee was hurting, and I do have some issues with that knee sometimes, but it was primarily because my futodachi was wrong. My front leg position was wrong. Yeah. And because of that, I was torquing on that knee. Yeah. And then I was given a correction for just unrelated. I didn't bring up the knee. I was given a correction on that stance. I'm like, oh, that's why. Yeah. That's why I was hurting. So, you know, remember that whenever you're making corrections to your karate, you're making changes. If you're not being given corrections that are taking you in a direction where it's a little bit more natural for your joints, then you might be moving the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's going to be physically taxing. Your muscles are going to get tired, and your tendons might have a little bit of, you know, stress just because they're being stretched, but it shouldn't be actually, like, painful in your joints. And I know we talked about this a couple podcast episodes ago. It shouldn't actually be physically painful in your joints. It shouldn't feel like in the joint kind of stuff. If it does, you need to really reevaluate your positioning or your movement, because you could be torquing. You could be in the right position, but you're over torquing your body and not controlling like your rotation or your movement forward or whatever. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, working on futodachi, working on timing of reverse punching, because apparently I'm still doing that wrong. And I don't know. I have a whole huge list, so I'm gonna work on all that stuff. Yeah, so gives you something to strive for. Yeah.
Well, we're trying to be balanced.
Yes.
We're trying to have the proper technique both sides in any situation, and that's all about proper alignment, proper timing. Right. Yeah, so to me, it's worth it. Yeah. It's worth it. I just think it's funny because we go through that whole spiel and we're like, yeah, we suck, and he laughs at us, we all laugh, and then we have that moment like...
we all have a great time.
Right, and then we have that moment like, yeah, that sucks. Like we realize after, we're like, man, we really got to get to work on this.
After like 4... corrections on the same thing. After that, I just start laughing. Like, okay, still wrong. Or it's got more that's wrong than what you just told me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, after 4 of them, I'm like, I start watching, like, oh, that's wrong too, isn't it, Steve? And, oh, this is wrong too. He's like, yep.
Whoops.
Yep.
All right. Well, cool. That wasn't as ranty as I thought it was going to be.
No, I think it was decent. I mean,
it was decently ranty.
I mean, that's all we do anyways, right? It's a podcast.
All we do is...
all we do is rant.
And cry.
And cry.
And snort, apparently. He's got this snot in my nose.
I keep on slamming the table.
Sorry, guys. So and he burped.
Yeah, I burped too, but that's just natural, man. Whatever.
Okay, well, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Bye!